Good day, chess world. So, we are continuing on our journey through the wonderful book, Logical Chess, Move by Move. This is a series that is focused on helping to grow your knowledge of how to attack, how to successfully build up attacks against the opponent's king that has specifically castled short. And this is very valuable in your games to look and learn, understand how do you break apart the opponent's position, what tools do you use, and very much the how to approach the successful attacks. And today's game is a wonderful demonstration from Siegbert Tarrasch. Tarrasch, of course, one of the strongest players in the world in the late 1800s and hugely influential in the teaching of chess. In Germany, he was named Das Teacher for his uh, contributions to educating, training, and spreading the news of chess. Now, this game is a wonderful demonstration as well of Tarrasch variation against the French defense. So this game starts off with a king pawn game, and we get e6, d4, d5, knight d2. Now, of course, knight d2, we've looked a little bit earlier at a French defense example. Go check some of the earlier videos in the series. And this one here is built on the idea of saying to black that they do not want to close the center, white, that is, doesn't want to close the center just yet. They want to first maintain some development flexibility. And they tell black, if you want the center closed, you're going to have to work a little bit more to get it to happen. And fundamentally, knight d2 allows the c pawn not to be blocked in. Another way of developing is, of course, the knight coming to c3, as we saw in an earlier one. So now the knight comes into f6. He plays e5. Tarrasch believed greatly that a space advantage was very important, and he believed that you shouldn't get a cramped position. He wrote famously that if your position was cramped, that it had the germ of defeat inside of it. So, which is not, of course, always true. But here we get the knight going back to d7, and black has accomplished the goal of closing the center, but they now have a space disadvantage. As you can see, that with this pawn especially established on e5, black now has a little bit less space on this king side. Also, with this pawn structure being fixed, we now have a closed center. This light squared bishop becomes the famous bad French bishop, and it is trapped inside the pawn chain. So black has quite a bit of work to do to really compensate for these features. And in return for getting this cramped position and closed position, Blank gets the opportunity to put pressure onto white's center with these pawn breaks of c5 and f6. Of course, they can't use them all at once, but he develops bishop d3. And why he chooses this square is he wants some flexibility for his pawns in future to be able to push them and decide what he's going to do with the knights. So the opponent plays c5, seeking to pressure the center, trade a pawn from the side for a pawn in the middle. So he plays c3, establishing this big connect four, putting all the pawns together in this chain. And here, part of the idea that black now needs to do is to maximize pressure onto this square. The reason for that is that if black can force white's pieces to defend the center, then white's pieces become diminished. But if black is unable to force the white pieces to defend, the white pieces will have a wonderful springboard to attack here on the king side. So that is part of the intention and the fight between the two sides. So knight c6 maximizes pressure onto this. And then he plays knight e2, and we see why he moved the bishop out to d3. Because generally, my advice to you, if you're not sure in the opening, try to develop knights before bishops. The reason for that is knights take a little bit longer to get into the game. But here, Tarrasch has a very clear plan. He does not want to block in this f-pawn, and as we will see, he intends to be able to place this other knight on f3, bringing a new piece to the king side. So queen b6, you can see, look at black's pressure here on the center as it starts to build. Now with the queen, the knight, the pawn, so many tools being used to pressure that center. So in this scenario, plays knight f3, maximizing the defense. And here black really should focus on that pressure as we've discussed, and it would become the main line of the Tarrasch actually, if they were to trade. And then this becomes a backward pawn, where it has no other pawns to support it, except it is not isolated because its compatriot is in front. And then they should break the center with pawn to f6. And then we have a very interesting contest, and even today, in modern chess, this is one of the main positions of the French Tarrasch. This is the kind of also concepts for you to learn and understand. When we talk of pawn breaks, the pawn on c5 was a pawn break. It's to try and break up the pawn structure. f6 is a pawn break, trying to break up the pawn structure. But here, black plays a little bit too reserved. They need to be more energetic to attack that white center. So white castles, and now black castles. As we'll see, this is a little bit risky. Might seem strange to castle, and why would it be risky? But this is an example where there is now a wonderful opportunity for white with all of this space. And we can see how we use it. We're going to see in this game, how do we utilize that space advantage to launch an attack successfully on the opponent's king. So the bishops can easily join in. The knight is ready to join in. This knight can come. So there's a lot of pieces. And we can see when we talk of a space advantage, what are we talking about? You see, this pawn is stuck on e6. So if black is to send supporting forces to their kingside, they will have to shuttle them through those two ranks, making it very challenging. So this is what we talk about a space advantage. Also, as a nice tip, if you're trying to understand when you're playing a middle game, where should I be aiming? Where do I potentially have the best chance for my pieces to succeed? One of the things to do is to look at the center, and it will point like an arrow sometimes in closed positions especially. Where should you play? The center's open, you should play through the middle. And here, with the center being closed, white has definitely got that benefit. We can see for black, black should be trying to play on the queen side. Their center points to the queen side, meaning they'll probably have a little bit more success on that side. So here, we have the opportunity. We want to build up onto the king side. And as we have seen in previous examples, and we'll see here again, it's very important that we need to make weaknesses, gaps in the enemy structure. So Tarrasch focuses on first bringing the knight into f4. He's starting to build up on that rule of 3. But now this is something very important for you to think about. Wait, in this position, we get this knight going back to d8 by black. They're really struggling. They see that it's very important to bring pieces across. So they see the danger, but now we as white need to make a weakness in this structure. And he plays a very simple move. Queen to c2. The purpose of this is provocation, is simply to get the pawns to move. What he wants to do is he would like a target. He says to his opponent, I want those pawns to move, and then whatever pawn moves, that allows me to adjust and target in this position. So black plays an intriguing choice. They play f5. They are desperate to try and close up the king side. And of course, we as white would like to open up that side of the board, since we have now so many pieces ready to strike. So we play the wonderful en passant. The pawn intercepts its opponent and now trades on the square. And then, of course, we are seeking to make more weaknesses. We want the pawn cover to move. So he plays this move knight g5. And look at this overwhelming build-up. We see the effect of the space advantage, because notice how it is so easy for white to get the queen, the bishop to join in. Now they have the knight on g5. They have the other knight on f4. All of these pieces that are able to contribute. It's a wonderful example to take note of. So the pawn moves to g6. Okay, pawn g6. He's trying to intercept this diagonal over here, trying to stop this problem. And I want you to think, if you were having this in a game, How would you approach this? What would you do? Well, yes, it's 100% that we know we can sacrifice here because we have so many weapons. It's more about us finding a way in for the queen. So immediately we have this forcing move. Bishop captures on g6. And here it is a devastating sacrifice that must be accepted by black because, of course, the follow-on is to threaten to capture here on h7 check. So the pawn captures back, queen takes check, and now king h8. And then I want you to think calmly, how would you finish off here? What would you do? Because Tarrasch has laid the groundwork, the foundations. The attack is ready here to finish. The opponent has no pawns covering the king. And if we look on the king side, black has so many extra weapons. Sorry, white has so many extra weapons. So the queen goes to h6 check, yes. In comes the knight, and look at this expression. There is checkmate there. There is this knight on g5 covering the square. Again, a wonderful demonstration of the rule of three. He has given up the bishop earlier, so now he has a queen and two knights, which are fighting and attacking against this knight. Something we've also seen earlier, just to identify here, that the rook is a very poor defender. Rooks do not make good defensive weapons. Just by the mechanics of how they play and contribute, it's very difficult for them to maneuver in these cases. So here black resigns because, of course, there are many checkmates. Queen to h8 is checkmate, knight takes e7 is checkmate. There is just too much to stop, and he will be mated in one move. Now let's understand what brought the success here. First and foremost, if we review for your own games and understanding, it was the space advantage, which became a very big deal when black castled that side. As a matter of fact, black probably should have delayed castling, and as we've looked at earlier, they should have left their king in the middle just for a moment and focused more to break up white's center with these pawn breaks of capturing and playing f6. And that's very, very important in this case. Then we see the procedure here from Tarrasch. He uses that extra space because that gives him time to bring pieces across. Important in your games. If you have a space advantage, you don't necessarily want to rush. You'd also prefer not to trade off pieces. Let your extra space work for you. So here, the knight going into f4, ready, is focusing on the intention of the piece to jump in and join into the attack. And then once we had that build-up play, we were able to set up with a further bit of work, with a queen joining in and focusing now, creating a gap, creating a weakness, which is so vitally important. Here's a little mini puzzle for you. Answer in the chat. Why could black not win a pawn by pawn takes d4 and then follow up with a knight takes and then the queen takes? Why does that not win a pawn? That's important. So put that one in the chat, and let's work together to understand that position better. But queen to c2, this idea is wonderful, gets the pawns to move, and yes, certainly, black could defend and should defend better with pawn h6 to try and avoid as many gaps as possible. But once they played pawn f5, they were thinking about bringing their piece across to defend on this side of the board, and now suddenly we had this wonderful strike where the knight joins in, and now the position has become desperate. So quite spectacular. And if we unpack one more question, what happens if pawn to h6? Let's see who of you are quite smart and recognizing. Put this one in the chat. How does white force mate? Where does the mate come from? So overall, we see in this game a wonderful example of how to use the extra space, how to provoke weaknesses on the enemy king side, and most importantly, how to bring in the destructive sacrifice to clear the enemy king of pawn cover. And once that happens, we see that brilliant follow-up. So let's see in the next game, the next one, of what wonderful themes and attacks we can pick up in game 11.